The morning at the naval training base began like any ordinary day, but there was something in the air, something quiet and strange, like a whisper carrying a warning. Recruits hurried across the grounds with their crisp uniforms and sharp movements. The metallic clatter of gear, the distant echo of commands, and the cold bite of the wind painted a picture of disciplined chaos. Everything followed a rhythm, a routine that no one dared disrupt. But then came a moment that broke the pattern. It started when an old man appeared on the far side of the yard, moving slowly with a wooden cane that shook faintly in his hand. His coat looked older than some of the ships on the base, and his steps were careful, almost fragile. He didn't look like he belonged in the middle of such a harsh, demanding environment. Yet he walked forward with a sense of quiet purpose, as if the ground beneath his feet held memories only he could feel. Some recruits noticed him and whispered among themselves, "Who is he? Why is he here? Is he lost?" Their voices carried the curiosity of youth, sharp, unfiltered, and at times insensitive, but the old man didn't hear or didn't mind. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, though they held a distant look, like he wasn't really seeing the present, but rather something from long ago. Sergeant Harlan was not a man known for patience. He believed the base should run like a perfectly wound machine, and anything out of place irritated him. So when he spotted the old man walking across the training ground, his expression hardened instantly. "Hey, you there," he shouted, his voice cracking through the air like a whip. "This area is off. Limits, move." The old man stopped, but his reaction was slow. He lifted his head with effort, as if the simple act weighed heavily on him. He tried to change direction, but his frail legs betrayed him. His cane slipped slightly on the wet ground, and he struggled to maintain balance. To him, the world didn't move fast anymore. Every step, every breath required patience. But patience was the one thing Harlan lacked. "What did I say? Move." The sergeant barked again, louder this time. Several recruits glanced at each other, sensing the tension building. They weren't comfortable, but none were brave enough to step in. Not against a sergeant who ruled with iron discipline. And then, in a moment that no one expected, Harlan grabbed a metal bucket sitting near the cleaning station. It was filled with cold water used to wash training mats. Before anyone could question his intention, he walked straight toward the old man. "Maybe this will wake you up," he muttered under his breath. With a quick, harsh movement, he flung the water onto the old man. The splash echoed across the yard. Gasps followed like a wave. The old man stood frozen, water dripping down his face, seeping into his coat, soaking his thin shirt underneath. For a moment, no one moved. Not even the wind dared to interrupt the stillness. The old man blinked several times, trembling, but he didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself. Instead, he whispered softly, "I'm sorry, son. I didn't mean to cause trouble." That single sentence stunned the recruits more than the splashing water. There was no anger in his tone, only sadness. Deep, patient sadness that came from years of understanding the world's harshness. The kind that didn't fight back, the kind that accepted pain quietly. Sergeant Harlan scoffed. "Sorry doesn't fix anything. You think you can wander around here like it's a park. This is a naval base, old man." The recruits looked down at their boots, ashamed, though they didn't know why. Maybe because the old man's apology felt wrong. Maybe because his gentle response felt like a punch to their hearts. Something about the whole scene seemed unjust, almost cruel, but still, no one said a word. The old man gripped his cane tighter. His fingers were pale and thin, and the water dripping from his sleeves made him shiver slightly. He didn't ask for help. He didn't expect it. He simply nodded slowly, accepting the insult like he had accepted many things in life, with quiet endurance. But what no one knew, not even the sergeant, was that they were not alone. Someone important, someone powerful, had been standing just out of sight. Someone who had witnessed the entire thing from start to finish. A pair of sharp eyes, trained for decades to catch even the smallest details, had seen the bucket lift, seen it tip, seen the water fall on a man who deserved respect, not humiliation. The moment was seconds away from turning into something none of the recruits would ever forget. Because the old man wasn't the only one with a past, and someone wearing 4 stars, was about to step forward and change the entire atmosphere of the base with just one command. Everything was about to shift. But for now, the recruits only felt the cold weight of silence pressing on their shoulders. The silence that followed the splash of water did not last long. It was broken by the low hum of an engine, a sound so familiar on base, yet the moment it was heard, several recruits instinctively straightened their posture. A black staff car rolled through the gates, moving with the smooth confidence of authority. The flags on the front fluttered in the cold breeze. This was not a vehicle that arrived casually. It belonged to someone the entire base respected, even feared. The car came to a slow stop near the edge of the parade ground. The driver stepped out with crisp precision and opened the back door. But before he could announce the arrival with the traditional salute or formal greeting, the passenger emerged on his own tall, sharp-eyed, and carrying an aura that made the very air feel heavy. A 4-star Admiral, Admiral James Calder walked with purpose, not wasting a second. His uniform was immaculate, his medals shining faintly under the pale morning light. Every step he took echoed a lifetime of leadership. He was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. His presence alone made people stand straighter, breathe quieter, and choose their words more carefully. He had come for an unannounced inspection, though nobody had expected him this early. His visits were rare but impactful. Stories were told across the base about how just one of his observations could change the entire training program for years. But on this morning, his inspection was forgotten the second he noticed what was happening near the training field. From a distance, he saw the old man soaked in water. He saw the recruits standing stiffly, unsure and uncomfortable, and he saw Sergeant Harlan towering over the elderly figure, his posture brimming with impatience. The Admiral paused for the slightest moment. His brows drew together, not in confusion, but in a quiet, simmering disappointment. What he had witnessed in these few seconds was not simple disobedience or disorder. It was disrespect, a violation of something far more sacred than rules. He continued walking. Each step grew heavier with intent. But Sergeant Harlan, focused on his anger, had no idea that the most powerful officer on the base was now standing behind him. "You think this is a joke?" Harlan snapped at the old man. "People like you just get in the way. Why even come here?" The old veteran did not answer. He simply lowered his head, drops of water sliding down the lines of his weathered face. His silence was not weakness. It was restraint, something the sergeant did not recognize. A voice thundered behind them, deep enough to cut through steel. "Sergeant Harlan, step away from him." Every recruit flinched. Several instinctively straightened into perfect attention, their bodies turning rigid. Harlan froze mid-step, his spine stiffening. Slowly, he turned around, and the moment his eyes landed on the 4 stars glinting on the Admiral's shoulders, all color drained from his face. "Admiral Calder, sir." His voice cracked like a teenager caught misbehaving. The Admiral did not give him a second to explain, not another word. He said sharply, his tone slicing through the cold air like a blade. The entire training field fell into absolute silence. No one dared move. No one dared breathe too loudly. Admiral Calder stepped past the stunned sergeant and walked toward the old man. His stern expression remained in place until he reached within a foot of the veteran. And then something unexpected happened. His posture softened. His eyes shifted from cold steel to warm recognition. He crouched beside the trembling old man, staring closely at his face, as if confirming a memory long buried. "Sir," he whispered, voice shaking slightly, "I know you." The recruits exchanged baffled glances. Their sergeant looked even more confused. How could a 4-star Admiral know this frail old man, someone Harlan had just called useless? The old man blinked, lifting his head slowly. When his eyes met the Admiral's, there was a spark, like 2 distant stars that had finally realigned after years apart. "You're Calder?" The old man murmured, his voice fragile but filled with recognition. Little Jimmy Calder. A wave of shock rippled across the recruits. Little Jimmy Calder, the most feared admiral in the region, the same man who oversaw entire fleets. The Admiral nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, sir. But I'm not little anymore. Harlan's knees nearly buckled. What kind of man had he just humiliated? The Admiral straightened, turning to face the platoon. His voice was stern but controlled. "This man," he said, gesturing toward the old veteran, "is someone all of you should know. Someone who shaped the very foundation of the Navy you serve." The recruits leaned forward, eager and anxious. The sergeant looked like he wanted to disappear. The Admiral continued, his tone shifting into something deeper, something more personal. "Before I became an admiral, before I learned leadership, courage, or discipline, I learned from him. He trained me. He taught me what honor truly means." Jaw after jaw dropped. The old man looked embarrassed by the praise. He tried to speak, but the Admiral shook his head gently, as if saying, "Let them hear it." At that moment, Sergeant Harlan realized the gravity of what he had done. He had thrown water on a living legend, someone who had shaped the very man standing before him in a four-star uniform, but the shock was far from over, because the truth about why the old man walked onto the base that morning was a story even more powerful than the Admiral's reaction. And the revelation that would follow was about to change the mood from tense to deeply emotional. The breeze on the training ground seemed to shift as Admiral Calder rested a steady hand on the old man's shoulder. The recruits watched with wide eyes, unable to process what they were seeing. Sergeant Harlan stood frozen, shame tightening around him with every passing second. But none of them understood the depth of the moment that was unfolding. Not yet. The Admiral's voice softened, losing its usual command and becoming something almost reverent. "Chief Petty Officer Raymond Hale," he said slowly, as though speaking a name carved into his very memory, "I never thought I'd see you again." A stunned silence washed across the field. Several recruits gasped quietly. They had heard stories, rumors whispered late at night in the barracks, of a legendary sailor who vanished from active duty decades earlier after saving dozens of lives during a catastrophic ship fire. His bravery had become a myth, a tale passed down by instructors to inspire new generations. But none of them imagined that myth could be a frail old man with trembling hands and a worn-out cane. Raymond Hale gave a small smile, weary yet warm. "I didn't think anyone would remember me," he said gently, his voice carrying an echo of history, "especially not you, Jimmy." Hearing the Admiral addressed so casually made the recruits straighten even more. It was as if the unshakable giant of the base had suddenly turned back into a young officer again, respectful, almost humbled. Sergeant Harlan swallowed hard, a painful lump forming in his throat. He took a step back, his face reddening with panic. "Sir, I had no idea." The Admiral lifted his hand to silence him. He didn't yell, he didn't scold, but the weight of his gaze was heavier than any shouted order. "That is the problem, Sergeant. You didn't know because you didn't care to know." Harlan felt the words hit like a punch to the chest. The recruits shifted uneasily, feeling the tension but also sensing a lesson forming, one that went far beyond military conduct. Meanwhile, the old veteran brushed a small bead of water from his cheek, smiling as if the cold drenching meant nothing. "It's all right," he murmured. "Life's given me worse than a bucket of water." But Admiral Calder's expression hardened. "Not on my base," he said firmly. For a moment, the old man looked down at his cane. The metal tip trembled slightly against the concrete. The silence felt heavy, almost sacred, as though the ground itself waited for him to speak. Calder crouched to his level again. "Chief, why are you here? You should be home, resting. You've earned peace 1,000 times over." The old man's eyes glistened, not from the water, but from memories. Memories so deep, they sat behind his gaze like ghosts waiting to be acknowledged. "My wife," he whispered. "She's gone, Admiral." The recruits felt their hearts tighten. Even Harlan closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the weight of the confession. Raymond continued slowly, voice trembling with both love and loss. "She passed away last year. We lived near this base our whole life. She loved the sound of the flags in the wind, the marching drills, the voices of the young recruits. She said it reminded her that life always moves forward, no matter how hard the past had been." The Admiral lowered his head slightly in respect. not as a superior officer, but as a man who understood grief. Raymond took a shaking breath. Every week after she died, I'd come here. I'd walk across the grounds and remember the days when she'd wait at the gates for me after deployment. I come here to feel less alone. Each recruit's chest tightened with empathy. Suddenly, the old man wasn't just a veteran. He was a widower searching for pieces of the life he once had. Every slow step he took that morning carried a story none of them had asked to understand. The Admiral touched the old man's shoulder gently. "You should never feel alone here. This base is your home. These sailors are your legacy." The words carried a powerful truth. For years, Raymond Hale had been more than a sailor. He had been a mentor, a protector, a symbol of courage passed down through generations. And now, even in age and vulnerability, he still influenced those around him. Sergeant Harlan looked at the ground, guilt washing over him. "Sir, Chief Hale, I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean—" Before he could finish, the old man raised a hand, halting him with surprising calm. "Son," he said gently, "we all make mistakes. Some of mine are bigger than yours. What matters is what you choose to learn from them." The simplicity of his forgiveness struck the recruits deeper than any punishment could. It wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. A lifetime of battles, both on sea and in life, had taught Raymond Hale what patience and compassion truly meant. The Admiral stood slowly, once again towering over everyone, but now not as a figure of wrath, rather as someone witnessing a moment of profound humanity. "Chief Hale," he said with a firm but warm voice, "you honor us with your presence. And today, you have reminded everyone here, myself included, what true leadership looks like." The recruits exchanged quiet glances, feeling the weight of the Admiral's words settle into their hearts. It wasn't the medals or the rank or the authority that defined leadership. It was kindness. It was humility. It was the ability to forgive even when forgiveness wasn't deserved. In the middle of the cold parade ground, surrounded by stiff uniforms and strict discipline, an old veteran had just taught an entire base the most valuable lesson they would ever learn. Yet the moment was not over. The Admiral had one more decision to make, one that would change the course of the rest of the day and perhaps the rest of Sergeant Harlan's career. And the entire platoon waited, breath held, for what would come next. For a long moment, no one moved. The recruits stood silently, watching the Admiral and the old veteran as if they were witnessing a scene from history itself. Even the wind seemed to pause, carrying the weight of everything that had just been revealed. Sergeant Harlan stared at the ground, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his entire military career. He expected a harsh punishment, a furious outburst, perhaps even removal from his position. But Admiral Calder didn't shout. He didn't explode with anger. Instead, he inhaled deeply and looked at Chief Raymond Hale with the kind of respect that wasn't taught in classrooms. It came from experience, from memories of younger days, from battles fought, from lessons learned under the guidance of this very man. "Chief Hale," the Admiral said softly, "you have taught me many things in my life, but today, you've taught me something again." He turned slowly toward the recruits, who stood stiff and alert, eyes glued to him. "All of you," he continued, "remember this moment. What you saw today was not just a mistake. It was an opportunity to understand what honor looks like. Not in medals, not in rank, but in how we treat those who came before us." His words hung in the air, powerful and piercing. The recruits felt them settle inside their chests like a permanent mark. Sergeant Harlan swallowed nervously, bracing himself for consequences he knew he deserved. But before the Admiral spoke again, Chief Hale gently tapped the ground with his cane. "Admiral," he said quietly, "don't be too hard on the boy. People grow the most when they're given a chance to change." The recruits exchanged surprised looks. Even after being drenched, humiliated, and spoken to harshly, the old veteran still chose compassion. His forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was a strength few possessed. It was the kind of strength that made him a legend. Admiral Calder nodded slowly, understanding the depth of the moment. "Very well, Chief," he said. Then he looked at Harlan, directly, firmly, yet without cruelty. "Sergeant." He said, "You will undergo retraining, not as punishment, but as a reminder. And from this day forward, whenever Chief Hale visits this base, you will personally escort him. You will ensure he is safe, welcomed, and respected." Harlan blinked, taken by surprise. It was not the punishment he expected. It was heavier, deeper, transformative. "Yes, sir," he managed to say, voice trembling. I won't fail again. You won't." The Admiral replied, "Because Chief Hale just gave you a second chance few people ever receive." A quiet murmur moved through the recruits, respect, admiration, even a sense of awe. They had come to training expecting to learn drills and regulations. Instead, they had witnessed a lesson in humanity. A young recruit stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, may I?" he asked, looking at the veteran. Admiral Calder nodded. The recruit removed his jacket and wrapped it gently around Chief Hale's shoulders. The old man looked surprised, touched. Another recruit rushed to offer gloves. Another offered a scarf. It wasn't ordered. It wasn't required. It was simply human kindness, something Chief Hale had inspired without even trying. "Thank you," Hale whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You boys remind me of better days." "Chief," a trainee said softly, "you're the reason those days existed in the first place." The old man smiled, small, fragile, but filled with warmth. It was a smile that carried thousands of miles sailed, countless hardships endured, and memories of a woman he loved more than anything. Admiral Calder gently placed a hand under Hale's arm. "Let's get you warm," he said. "Your family here, Chief. You always have been." The entire platoon formed a respectful path as they walked toward the canteen. Harlan followed slightly behind, his posture no longer rigid with pride, but humbled by responsibility. Every step he took beside the veteran served as a silent promise that he would never repeat his mistake. As they approached the building, several officers came out, alerted by the unusual gathering. When they saw the veteran with the Admiral, recognition struck like lightning. Some saluted instinctively, others stood in stunned silence. Word spread quickly across the base. Chief Raymond Hale had returned. Inside the warm canteen, a hot drink was prepared for him. Recruits hovered nearby, eager to hear stories, to learn from the very person who had trained their admiral decades earlier. And Raymond Hale, despite his age, found himself surrounded not by pity but by respect, perhaps more respect than he had ever felt in his entire life. The Admiral sat beside him, listening as if he were once again the young officer learning from the master. Harlan stood at attention nearby, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. By the time the sun began to set, the base had changed. The day had started with cold water and cruelty, but it ended with warmth, understanding, and unity. Later, as the recruits walked back to their barracks, one of them said, "I'll never forget today." Another nodded. "Me neither." We saw what real leadership looks like. And on that quiet evening, as Chief Raymond Hale stepped out of the canteen and looked toward the horizon, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. The base was no longer just a place of memories. It was still his home, still his family. Sometimes heroes don't raise their voices. Sometimes they don't stand tall. Sometimes they walk slowly, leaning on a cane. But their presence changes everything. And on that day, an entire naval base learned that kindness, true, unshakable kindness, can be more powerful than authority, more respected than rank, and more unforgettable than any uniform.